Welcome to the Recruiting Stories podcast, where we celebrate recruiting by exploring the stories of leaders and top performers by digging into their stories and understanding how recruiting has impacted their journey and their success. Guys, welcome to episode 10 of the Recruiting Stories podcast, powered by Cover 3 Consulting. Can't believe that it's episode 10 already. Thank you guys so much for being a part of this journey and listening and being a part of this. Our guest today is Stinson Dean. He's the CEO of Deacon Lumber. Stinson's also a personal friend of mine. We've known each other for a while, even since our college football playing days. As I sat back and looked at what might be valuable to my listeners and to my network, hearing from shippers and what's going on in the lumber market stood out. If you've been paying attention, the lumber market is a rocket ship right now. And Stinson's actually been on a number of media outlets in the past, couple of months here. He's been on CNBC, been on Bloomberg. He's been, written, quoted in Fortune magazine and a number of other publications as an expert on what's going on right now, why things are happening the way they are, and what might happen in the future. So we're going to get to hear some of that wisdom, how that impacts transportation, his take on workforce economics right now, and then we're also going to hear about his recruiting story. It'll be an awesome conversation as someone who has been, recruited as a Division I athlete to, starting his own business in lumber trading and how that all unfolded, and hopefully some wisdom that will help you if you in transportation help move lumber or are interested in helping, lumber companies move their freight. It'll be an interesting listen and also just a helpful market update for you as well. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Give me a shout if you got a question to connect with Stinson on Twitter, on LinkedIn as well. Those links will be in the show notes. All right, everybody, welcome to the Recruiting Stories podcast. This week, our guest is Stinson Dean. He's the CEO of Deacon Lumber, and I'm excited to bring Stinson on to really understand what the heck is going on with the lumber market right now. We've seen different things in the news, and many of you actually haul and move lumber. I want to bring him in for his expertise. So welcome to the show, Stinson.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Looking forward to it. Lumber's been up. Now it's a little bit down, and it's a really interesting time to talk about it.
Absolutely. And some of you might have even seen Stinson, right? He's been on CNBC, he's been on Bloomberg and a few other different media outlets recently, kind of giving his thoughts and insight on what's happening. So, of course, I want to talk about your recruiting story. I want to talk about what's going on in the market. I want to talk about how that affects transportation. First and foremost, will you just kind of give everybody just a quick breakdown of like what Deacon Lumber does and what you do as a lumber trader?
Sure. So the easiest way to put it is I hope to at least buy low and sell high. I buy rail cars of lumber, mainly from Canada and the Pacific Northwest, and I put it in reload facilities or warehouses across the Southeast effectively. And then from there, I sell just-in-time delivery truckloads to local lumber yards. I don't sell the home builders, and I really don't consider myself a middleman as much as a liquidity provider, because the liquidity for lumber can get so oversupplied or undersupplied that a guy like me can step in and fill the gaps when folks are a little bit short on their lumber inventory. They call me and I can get it to them the next day via flatbed truck.
This sounds like a niche, right? It seems like there's probably not a whole lot of people out there doing the same thing as you. Is that right? Or how did you land in that specific space, kind of providing liquidity?
Yeah, there's not a lot of us. There's a few. The lumber market in general is pretty niche, and specifically commodity lumber, your 2x4s, 2x6 stud and plate material, the stuff that goes behind drywall. It's not specialty. It's not value add. I mean, we buy it. I don't even see it. I see my inventory like once a year when I go count it. And then we just, we're trading the market movements. And I got into it. I was in medical device sales and I wanted to get out of healthcare in general. And I was recruited over to a company called FC Stone, which was a commodities risk management consultant and brokerage group. They brokered futures contracts and consulted folks on managing commodity price risk. I started out in ag with farmers and grain elevators, trading corn, wheat, and beans, and understanding the basis and the seasonality of harvest and planting season. And I kind of dumbed my way into lumber. I found that it wasn't as saturated with consultant types. So I leaned into that, and I didn't do great as a consultant. No one would really listen to me that much, but I thought I was pretty smart. So the short story is I'm like, man, I'd love to take my own advice. So I was able to scrape some money together, and market timing was really important and lucky. And just about 4 years ago, I started Deacon Lumber, kind of after gaining that consultant experience.
Very cool. So let's loop back then. So you talked a little bit about how you were recruited over to FC Stone, and that kind of helped lead from trading into what you do now. And for those of you who don't know, Stinson and I know one another. He's a good friend of mine. We played some college ball together, and Stinson was a Division I student athlete. We played college ball together at University of Central Missouri for a brief stint there. Walk me through some of that, going from college, maybe some of how that recruiting impacted your journey, and how you might have done something else had you been recruited or chose a different, educational path or what have you as well.
Yeah. So you want me to speak to my recruiting story from high school, getting recruited to Wyoming? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
or from college? Yeah. So I was a high school quarterback, and Wyoming came in pretty early the summer before my senior year and offered. And it was really important to me to graduate high school early and enroll at whatever school I was going to in January. Maurice Claret had done that a couple years before I graduated. He kind of set that standard. Now it's super common, very common. But Wyoming was just the first and quickest to offer. And I committed pretty early in the fall so I could get these things lined up and get enrolled and get out to Wyoming in January. I still keep in touch with the coach that recruited me, Coach Applewhite. I think he's down at TCU now as a running backs coach. And it's such a formative experience to be a high school kid and go to college. But generally, the recruiting experience is pretty special, especially when it's like one of your first times, like being recruited, being wanted. That's kind of a pretty fun and formative experience for someone to actively be wanting you and your skill set to go somewhere. So it's been interesting as an adult, 15, 16 years later, 17 years later.
Yeah, it gets further and further along. Yeah.
That first recruiting experience, it helps you have good perspective on when I'm trying to recruit employees or folks are trying to convince you to, change careers or go work for a particular company. That first experience in college football I still kind of lean on that, and how Coach Applewhite recruited me was just so consistent and real and honest. And that was one of the best parts of my experience out there, was that relationship with him, and it's lifelong. So it's been
I was gonna ask you, like, what were the things that stood out, because I think back to my own recruitment and part of why I ended up where I ended up was just because I felt like most wanted, but then also I felt it was the most human person won for me. Like, it wasn't the biggest song and dance over here. It wasn't the most, money over here. It wasn't, team with the best record even. Like, it was a team where I was like, man, this person I think actually cares about me the most. That was how it was for me. Did you feel similar things with Coach Applewhite, or walk me through that?
Yeah. Real consistent message. It was like 2 or 3 things that we're about. And by the time we're halfway through this recruiting process, I could repeat them back to them. So when I thought about Wyoming, I kind of knew like that pitch, that message was real clear. And everyone understood that folks were competing for your commitment. But it also kind of depends on your personality. You and I are fairly similar. I didn't need a flashy place or real sexy setting. Clearly, I went to Wyoming.
Laramie,
and it was, that's right. Now I love the West now, but at the time it was like, man, do I really want to go try and throw a football in 0-degree weather and 60-degree winds? Yeah. But as at the end of the day, I'm not an NFL quarterback, and I ended up transferring from the University of Wyoming after 3 years. But, what Applewhite pitched me on as far as growing into a man, teaching me how to live on my own, all those things were true. And I've always appreciated that, especially that big jump from high school to college. So those things outside of football, really stuck with me and made me excited to go up there.
Very cool. And we ended up coaching together, Stinson and I, for a short period of time at Mid-American Nazarene University as well. So I know for me, I thought, hey, I'm going to coach football. That was something I was going to do with my career. Obviously, I think you thought similar. Walk me through going into coaching, and then from coaching, then going into business, and kind of what that process was like, and then obviously how you got to FC Stone.
Yeah. So you and I were in the trenches at our small college football program. Very unique coaching staff. I don't know if your listeners have ever gotten a preview, but we had seriously 6 Super Bowl rings on our coaching staff between all the coaches. They're all kind of ex-NFL players that were looking to finish their degree. And we were there in the Kansas City Metro. So it was really an awesome experience. But I found out that I didn't like recruiting at all. I didn't like the high school kids and dealing with the egos, and I just didn't have a heart for it, and it didn't get my competitive juices going. Where you, on the other hand, were an excellent recruiter and lived it, and it's no surprise that you're making a whole living out of it now. And you were awesome. I mean, you probably don't get to tell people this, but you brought in 3 All-Americans, 5 all-conference guys, offense, defense, the whole deal.
Keep going.
Keep really going. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And we sat right next to each other, our little cubicles, and he was great. And I learned a bunch of stuff here from you. So,
the funny part is we didn't know anything about recruiting or how to do it at that point either. So we were really just winging it at the beginning there. So it was kind of funny to learn from one another as well.
Yeah. What works, what doesn't. I was almost at an instinct. I talked about all the Super Bowl rings. Remember, that was the first thing we would say. Hey, I know we're a small school, but we have Super Bowl rings. Yeah. And Adrian did a great job. And so I just found that to be a successful college football coach, it was way more about recruiting than it was X's and O's and strategy. And I'm I just don't love that life. So I decided I was getting my master's. We were both graduate assistants. After I got my master's, I was going to be done with football, which was just weird. I just thought I was going to do that the rest of my life. And but it was nice to kind of be a assistant coach and understand this isn't for me. So then I went into sales. When you and I, and this is really interesting to talk to you because I'm a markets guy. I trade markets based on supply and demand, and the labor market to me is no different. And when you and I were busting into our professions, we had the worst economy on the planet.
Really bad.
For years and years. The best thing you could do, we told ourselves, was to go to grad school because there's no jobs to get. So just keep furthering your education. You and I had those paid for as graduate assistants. But, we came out and it's you want to do sales or sales? And that was
Sell insurance.
Oh gosh, insurance, financial planning, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it was really, really tough. So you were having to sell yourself way more than I think what's happening now. And that was, an interesting experience and a mindset that's honestly hard to shake now that I'm in a position to hire people. Like, where's my follow-up email and where's my handwritten note? And I'm like, they don't need my job. Unlike 10 plus years ago, we all needed jobs. There's way more job seekers than jobs available. Now it's the other way around. I mean, Jolt's job openings, we're going to have 10 million open jobs here, I think, in a few months on that job openings report. And it's just like the other side. So if you're the recruiter, like, you have to actively pursue talent. So I got a lot of options. And in the bottom of that pay scale is more competitive than it's ever been, with extended unemployment and Chipotle paying $15 an hour and Amazon. If you're going to be a small business and you're going to hire $15 to $20 an hour type person, you got to change your mindset. They do not need that job in the same way that you need them. And that is different. And so I just, coming out of school and getting in sales, which I love, and I think everyone should be in sales and have a taste of that and what it takes. But there's so much more choice now. And as a recruiter, you have to compete with government, welfare, with big corporates who can offer better pay packages. And you got to be innovative, and you got to have something you can sell, because unlike when you and I came out of school, prospective employees don't need your job specifically. They have a lot of options.
Right. 100%. Yeah. And I think that was the thing. I think back to when we came out, I remember I think I really took like the first thing that I got, because I was like, who knows, like, this could be it, And so I just kind of went and ran with it. And then, again, we're similar in the sense that, sales was something I probably was destined to do, sales recruiting, very similar. So ended up in that world, really glad that I did, because I learned a lot in that process. But a lot of times I'll have people ask, like, okay, well, how do I get into X role or that role? I'm like, you don't right now. Like, you just start somewhere. And if you start somewhere, you're going to be able to take that and say, hey, you have to sell yourself still, right? But you have to do an incredible job where you're at first. And if you do an incredible job, then you can say, hey, I can like quantify my value. And I tell people that all the time from a resume perspective. Is like, if you list your tasks, well, everybody can list a job description. You have to be able to quantify your value and say, hey, we use McDonald's, right? I didn't just make fries, right? I made fries so quickly that we improved our process so much that we were able to get so many cars through the drive-through line that we could focus on other tasks, right? We could get other things done for inventory, wash more dishes, etc. And so we made the franchise more money. Like, you've got to be able to speak in that way.
Yeah, and then that gets scaled across McDonald's worldwide, right? And and that's the value. And people are understanding, they should, that you will get paid for value that you bring. And if you can prove that you're going to be valuable at this entry level position, and then once you get in there, you bring value above and beyond by improving a process or suggesting something, or having several skills where you can pick up the slack when someone's not there. Business owners, employers, like, that's a huge premium. And it just goes back to what we were just talking about. Like, that human capital has never been in our generation, our lifetimes, more valuable than it is right now. So you got to get started and get into a company and a culture. Now I'm coming back to your recruiting pitch in college. You want to sign up for a culture that's going to grow you. And then you kind of find your way, once you're in that culture, that you can really hitch your wagon to, and be confident that you're working for a company that has integrity and is going in a direction you want. And then you can just navigate internally. But it's really interesting. I'm glad you had me on. You probably thought I was going to talk about lumber a bunch, but the labor market is so interesting right now. And when people tweet, "Oh, I can't find quality labor," can't find them. I'll say you're telling on yourself, because why don't quality people want to work for your company? That's what you need to ask yourself in the mirror, not, well, everyone around me is lazy and they don't want to work. It's like, no, they got other options, bro. And this is the reality. And you need to ask yourself, why isn't your company a place where quality people want to work? Don't tweet, I can't find quality people. Like, that's your fault. And that is just so different than it's been in the last 30 years.
We had Mike Sorelli on, former Navy SEAL, wrote the Talent War book a couple episodes ago. And one of the things he always says is, like, A players attract A players. And so part of that, to me, that I would tell people is, like, obviously, if you're not a high-performing organization, you're not going to attract high-performing individuals. And if you got a high-performing individual into one of those places, they might be uncomfortable. So you really need to self-evaluate first as an organization and say, what is going to be the best fit for us here? How do we need to change so we can not only become a high-performing organization, a values-driven organization, because we need to attract who we are. Because if we're not that now, what changes do we need to make to be that first? Then we will attract those things once we've identified those things.
And that's such a great point, because high performing folks all up and down the pay scale. And one of my big emphasis is, that $15 an hour worker needs to be a prospective employee needs to be focused on and recruited in the same effort and red carpet type stuff that you do your high level sales executives. And you and I know, and I'm sure you talk about your business. I mean, your business is called Cover 3 Consulting, which is a sports and football play on words. Athletes are used to a culture in a locker room that there's shared sacrifice and there's a pecking order and there's respect earned. And if you have that kind of culture, you're gonna bring people in that the dollar signs are important, but then everyone's going to be, it's a market pay rate. So everyone's going to be roughly paying the same amount. For workers, the difference is going to be the culture. And that's such a great point. If you can build the culture, you'll attract talent, and folks will, all things equal, pay wise, or maybe even a little bit less. You can sell people on your culture, and that goes a long way.
For sure. Let's talk lumber, right? Stinson's our lumber expert. And we've seen, like we said, we talked about, the just rocket ship that is lumber, which has been, extremely frustrating for many people. It's changed a lot of things. People are
not for me, buddy.
Right. Yeah. So talk with me about it. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about what's going on and maybe what people can expect or what you foresee from your perspective.
Yeah. So last fall we hit $1,000 per unit, and our unit of measure in lumber is per 1,000 board feet. So we hit $1,000 per 1,000 board feet, which was just like mind blowing. It was 50% above the old all-time high. So earth shattering. And then it kind of fell in half during the winter months. And then in January, it started going a little bit higher. We're back to 1,000, and we're just kind of flatlined there. And what happened, and I think now that's in our rear view mirror, it's very obvious. It was a short squeeze where builders and their suppliers committed to jobs first, and they're like, there's no way we're going to be at $1,000. The last time we were at $1,000, we fell to $500. So I'm going to commit to these sales at that $1,000 kind of cost, but I'm not going to buy the lumber yet. I'm going to wait till it falls, and I'm going to make a ton of money. So they shorted the market. They commit to the sale they commit to the sale first and buy second. Well, they waited to buy because the whole premise of that strategy was for lower prices. Well, price stayed about the same. And then someone stepped in and bought, and it kind of broke the dam, and lumber prices went up. And so these folks who had these commitments, they had a choice. Either I default on my commitment, lose the customer, get sued, lose market share, or I just bite the bullet, I pay whatever price I can to fulfill this obligation, and then we try again, on the next quote. And so that's what happened. No one chooses the first one where they just default.
Right.
You just can't do that and be a business. So they had these commitments they had to honor, and there was not enough lumber, and the highest bidder would win, and we get the wood, and it just drove prices higher and higher and higher. So recently, mid-May, I kind of sensed things were changing, and it wasn't kind of that scramble to buy commitments from earlier. Now it's like, hey, let's buy a little bit extra because we're going to be busy here in a month or two. Let's not have this short squeeze happen to us again. And typically that's when markets roll over. Folks get long, and they buy extra inventory, being convinced that we're just going to keep going up forever. And now, since mid-May to now 4 to 5 weeks later, the price is down 40% as of today from the high. But the wildest part is we're down 40%. We'll probably get down 50% from the $1,700 high, and we'll still be more than 10% higher than we were in the history of lumber ever.
Wow.
We're going to fall 50% and still be higher. So it shows you how great demand is and how short supplied we are. I put a lot of information on there about how and why prices went up, but the driving part of that was the short squeeze. But I also think we're going to be higher for longer. It's like, as far as what's next, to me, I don't think we go to pre-COVID price levels for lumber and building materials in general. The main reason behind that thesis is most of the lumber we build houses with in the U.S. comes from Canada. Folks don't realize that. The framing lumber behind the drywall, the majority of it is Canadian lumber, and then it's specific Northwest lumber. It is not lumber from the U.S. South, southern yellow pine. We just don't build houses out of that. We build decks out of that. We build apartments out of that.
Gotcha.
We don't build houses out of that. So unless that changes, to me, we're going to be higher for longer because the Canadian tree situation is way different than the U.S. South situation. And to put it quickly, the Canadian, from forest fires and beetle kill over the last 10 to 20 years, they don't have as much accessible forests that they would need to meet this kind of U.S. housing demand. They've reduced their logging, and it's run and controlled by the Canadian government, all that land up there. And they've said, they actually made this decision 5 years ago. We're slowing the pace of logging because the current pace we're at is not sustainable. You won't find Canadians that disagree with that. So with that dynamic, like, this is not changing. We're not going to be able to log more out of Canada. So we have to either accept higher for longer prices or change how we build homes in the U.S. And I think we're just going to be higher for longer.
Well, and one of the things you talked about was, demand for lumber is obviously driven primarily from real estate and housing starts, right?
Right.
So, many people talk about inflation right now, right? And so cost of homes or, cost of lumber is due to inflation, but it doesn't sound like that's necessarily the case, at least for this specific thing, and not, at least not in total, right? Yeah,
I'm glad you said that, because it's a big thing. Like, look at lumber. Inflation is here. We're screwed, right? To kind of parse my words a little bit, but baby boomers are very scarred by inflation from the early 80s. And, ask any baby boomer about their mortgage, and they'll freak out and tell you it was an 18 to 20% mortgage and da-da-da-da. What they won't tell you is the purchase price was 1 to 2 times the average annual earnings, when now it's like 7 to 8. But inflation is a thing, but we have not had barely a hint of inflation in 30 years. So it's kind of, lumber specifically is long overdue for a kind of a higher price range. You look at oil. Oil used to trade in between $10 and $20. And then going into the 2000s, China's industrial boom. Now we got negative, I guess. But generally that average price is $50. we're trading over $70 now. No one thinks that's inflation because it kind of stabilized. And so I think that's what we'll see with lumber. It won't keep going up. Clearly, it's stopped going up now. And I just think we're going to normalize at a higher range than in history. And, housing inflation, it's just a supply and demand thing. We're not building enough homes. You can look at interest rates, definitely are low, and you can buy more house, build more. You can afford more house. More people can afford a house because of lower interest rates. But we just are not meeting supply. We're not building enough homes. So until we're building enough homes, which to me is 2 million homes a year, we're like 1.5 right now. And prices are still going up after we're meeting demand, then I'll be concerned about inflation, but we're just not meeting demand. So
if we're not meeting demand, so if we're not meeting demand for housing, like all in all though, however, like you think real estate, because we're not meeting demand, real estate prices probably not going anywhere but up right now, right?
Yeah, people hate to say that, but yeah, I'll say that with a lot of confidence. I say it this way: there's a huge bid in housing. If housing wants to stagnate or fall, there's just a huge tranche of people who need to buy a home that will step in and buy homes. And to me, I could see. I don't know about commercial real estate per se, but single family homes. The worst case. The bear case scenario for me is some stagnation and price appreciation where we're not going up 10, 20% a year, which we need. And while it stagnates, everyone's wages are going up because of inflation, which is good. So wage inflation is happening. And then all of a sudden, the home affordability gap closes. So yeah, I'm a huge bull on housing. I mean, obviously I have a conflict of interest there. I need it to be because I sell lumber for a living, but there's a reason I liquidated my retirement and my kids have no college fund. And it's because I think we have a 10-year housing cycle that's going to be phenomenal. And we're all so scarred from 2008 for, I mean, home builders don't even believe it. Like they're the reason we don't have enough supply. And this isn't fair to them, but I like to say they don't want to overbuild because of what happened to them 12 years ago. And the home builders that are around today are only around because they were extremely conservative because they survived the Great Recession. So they're just naturally conservative. And we're just taking a long time for people to lean in and be like, it's here. This is our time. This is our sector. We need to build and increase supply because demand is definitely there.
Note to home builders, keep building homes so Stinson can retire and his children can go to college, please.
Yeah, I do. I need to pay for college. We got 10 years for my first one, but yeah. It's
good.
I'm all in, baby. All in on lumber.
That's
so
good.
You got to understand that when I tell you I'm a big housing bull because I have to be.
That's good. So talk to me about transportation, right? So obviously these two things go hand in hand, right? It's not like you can cut your lumber and then just build a bunch of houses right there because it's all in the Pacific Northwest, as you mentioned. So we got to get it from there down to wherever, whatever metropolitan,
right?
Yeah, wherever markets are being built. So how has that impacted the lumber market? How has that impacted transportation prices? What you've seen there?
It's transportation prices are materially higher than I want to say a year ago, but like COVID was weird, but like 2 years ago. 2018, honestly, was I'm thinking flatbed, 48-foot flatbed trucks is just what most lumbers moved on. 2018 was the toughest logistics market that any of us have experienced, from rail to trucking. In lumber, it's standard to agree to a transaction with your customer, and within 24 hours, the lumber is booked, and then within 48 hours, it's at least picked up. If not even sooner than 48 hours. And in 2018, it was like 2 weeks. And that was a short squeeze. Like the same way lumber, there was 100 houses committed to be built, but only 50 carloads of lumber available. only half the houses are going to get built, and that lumber is going to go to the highest bidder. And I think that's what happened in 2018. There's 100 loads to move, but there's only 70 trucks available. And the difference I see now, prices went up, and then I'm sure everyone's aware of like the big recruiting push for over the road truckers, and I feel like that labor market, there's more liquidity available for trucks than there was 3 years ago, but you got to pay more now for sure. So what I have found, I try to treat my truckers, and I use a third-party logistics companies. I call up a broker and have them handle it. But I try to treat the truckers very well. If they're stuck at an unload spot, I'll pay them, a wait time. I'll pay the higher rate. If they complain about a hiccup or something, like I'm real quick to try to resolve that problem, because for me, not having internal trucks and not having an internal broker, I want to be the customer that the broker can lean on, because the broker wants to take care of their truckers too. I look at them as my employees. I would want to take care of my truckers in the same way that they get compensated for their time. So I don't know how other lumber folks are doing it, but I gladly pay the higher rate to get booked and shipped in 48 hours, because that brings value to my customer. And I tell them, hey, I'm pricing this to get to you in 2 days.
Right.
And, you can go take a cheaper price, but they're going to like nickel and dime the truck market until they can get one booked, a week out. And so for me, the liquidity is there. It's just the prices are higher. And again, as a market guy, it doesn't bother me. Everyone's paying a higher price. So I'm pretty happy with the truck market right now. And I nothing's contracted for me. Everything's spot market. While we're on this podcast, I sold 12 truckloads of lumber, and I got to get a truck under them, and I'll email my brokers and see what's going on. And they had no idea that was coming. So it's just like, it can be volatile in that aspect, which I'm used to, but I usually pay the rate, and I am not in a position to negotiate with these truckers because of the market dynamics. And I accept that. And, we try to move lumber better than our competitors because we're not cheap.
Well, the lesson there is treat your truckers well, right? I mean, they're the backbone of the industry, and if you can keep them happy and treat them well, obviously it's going to work out better for everybody, and they're going to be interested in working with you more often.
Yeah, exactly, and that's it. I want them, when they got everyone wanting them, everyone's needs it delivered right away, and Deacon Lumber's in that mix. I want them to trust Deacon Lumber, not because they owe me a favor, but because they know I treat them fairly. And that's an important, I think, distinction. Because all things equal, it's similar to our conversation earlier about culture. You just want to be the one with that leg up that's somewhat intangible. Like, Stinson will take care of me. He's dependable. All his data's correct. His addresses, his phone numbers, his loadings, blah, blah, blah. Very smooth to work with, pays on time, all that stuff. Because that blue collar worker just has way more leverage than we've seen in time.
Absolutely. As we kind of work towards wrapping up here, thinking of, lumber as a market that I would say a vertical that, a lot of transportation companies might be interested in, working with or moving for. What advice would you give them if, you were talking to somebody, said, hey, I really would love to help, help move lumber, help lumber companies, get from point A to point B. What advice would you give them?
Yeah. So specifically to businesses like mine, where I'm largely doing, I don't even know the verbiage, but like local loads, like I'm going from Dallas to Houston or from Atlanta to Greensboro. They're not 2-3 day trips or anything, but they're also spot market. If you're trying to get into that business and bring value to the spot market, moving building materials, and you wake up, you don't know what loads you're going to get that day. Updating your, again, it's a market, and one, I'm not trading actively. My broker is. So if I can get updates on the market, my best broker is like, hey, he said this in January. He's like, rates are going through the roof. I don't know what's going on, but you need to understand that when you're quoting, because I'll quote and agree to a PO with this kind of general freight rate in mind. And then I'll go book the truck. I'm like, oh, by the way, that's $500 more. Like, wait, what? Yep. And so having a pulse on the market and understanding those lanes and what they're going for. And that, to me, if I'm going to use a broker, market intel, that's what we call it. That's hugely important. And nothing big and drawn out. I don't need a phone call every day. A very nice bulleted email, like this lane to this lane, weird stuff's going on. This one's kind of soft. There's 100 loads posted and there's only like 30 trucks looking for loads. Like, that's an indicator. Like, these are stuff I don't have time to look at, don't have access to. So if someone could tell me that, it would help me run my business better and set expectations with my customer. Say, hey, I can't get it to Shreveport in the 48 hours that you're used to. So just so you know, when I price this, I'm going to need a few more days. And I get that information from my broker. Outside of, I mean, that's kind of from a customer perspective. There's all sorts of different lumber kind of logistics segments. Southern yellow pine in the U.S. South. These mills are in the middle of nowhere, Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, South Carolina, Florida. And they have a big labor problem, and trucking is very expensive because it's hard to get a truck to go into Mississippi and then go to Atlanta. And then, like, what do they do to get back to Mississippi? Like, not much. So if you can break into that market or at least understand what you're up against. And there's going to be such consistent business from Southern yellow pine. So, and the reason I'm bringing up Southern yellow pine is that product is primarily moved directly from the producer to the consumer via truck and not rail. Canadian lumber, obviously, majority of it comes in on rail. And the biggest market that is growing in lumber is Southern yellow pine. And because of the things I touched on earlier, there're just way more trees and way more production capacity in the U.S. South, kind of that SEC country. So if I were to invest in the building materials and lumber logistics game, it would be catering to where the supply is, and the supply is in the U.S. South. And that stuff will be moving as Canadian lumber gets more and more expensive. You will see more adoption of U.S. South lumber going further and further north and gaining market share up there than what it's used to. And they need trucks. I know that. It's just hard. Your folks would know better than I would, but as a layman person, it just seems like, yeah, it would be hard to get someone to go into the deep South.
Sure.
And, because there's nothing to bring to the deep South. Anyway, so that's kind of the future of lumber.
No, the good, economic viewpoint. But I think one of the things you touched on earlier that I think is incredibly helpful is those market updates, as well as just having the relationship to be able to provide that information. So if you can develop a relationship with someone where you're adding value by saying, hey, not just here's the price, but here's what's going on in the market that is beneficial and will affect your freight specifically. And I think that's a home run.
Yeah, because I get in trouble when I ship late. And I ship late because I had this expectation, okay, it's 48-hour turnaround, but then it turns into a 72-hour or a week long to get a truck booked. And sometimes that's no one's fault, but it would be very valuable if preemptively, before I'm like, hey, I need a truck from A to B, that morning, like, just so you guys know, we're seeing lead times extend 3 to 4 or 5 days. So that helps set expectations with my customer so I don't overpromise and underdeliver.
Awesome. Cool. As we wrap up, Stinson, I appreciate you being on here. What is maybe a book that has been really impactful to your journey to get to where you are today?
Oh, man. So we talked about sales. My favorite sales book was Spin Selling. Mm-hmm. It's pretty old. I love that. Kind of the consultative sale and asking questions. And that goes through It's a transferable skill through all of life. Recently, I've been reading this book called The World for Sale. Mm-hmm. It's a book about commodities written by a Bloomberg journalist who specializes in energy. And it's just this historical, chronological, relatively retelling of the world of energy trading and electricity and corn and corporate espionage. And what is it when you betray your country? Like folks were doing business with Iran and they weren't supposed to be. Is it treason? I guess.
Yeah, treason.
But, like folks like doing business with countries that are banned, and like when the Soviet Union fell, it was just a clown show over there because they had all this industry, but there was all internal, and so that fell. And they're like, we're making all this steel. And we've never had an outside customer in our life, and like these commodity traders would come in and steal it from them, basically, because they would have no idea what the world market price was. So anyway, I love that book, and for anyone interested in worldwide markets and how it all works, The World for Sale is a really fun one.
I'll take a history book any day. Anything historical is interesting for sure. Cool. And I guess last question is just if you had to go back and give your 20-year-old self some advice as you were kind of getting started on that journey, what would you tell yourself?
I would buy GameStop. I would buy AMC, Monster energy drink. When I was 20, it's like the number one return stock. I was so worried about failing. So everything's results oriented, as it should be. It's just about outcomes. And it was hard for me to overcome setbacks professionally and missing a sale or having a low sales ranking. And I would just extrapolate that and let it spiral. And I couldn't recover, which as a quarterback, like that's a skill that you need. You throw an interception and you kind of go out on the next series and make up for it. And so I just put so much weight and stakes on every little thing early in my career because I just didn't have the perspective of now is the time to make mistakes. Now is the time to make chances. So I would just tell myself to relax a little bit and lean into making mistakes. Because when I was afraid to fail, I would clam up and I wouldn't perform really well. When I was relaxed and if I fail, we'll get better for it. And then I would perform better. So that would be my advice.
Paralysis by analysis, right?
Oh, guilty, big time. And now somehow I've turned into a trader where like you can't be paralyzed.
Taking risks all the time. Right?
Yeah. So if you're paralyzed, you're not a trader, you're an analyst. And I'm not an analyst anymore. I'm a trader, and I've come full circle with that. So it helps.
It's good. No, I can think back to very similar moments in my own journey where, and it is scary. I think early on too, you're cautious because, hey, this is an opportunity. This is a big deal. And, what are people going to think? And, what am I going to do if this doesn't work out? But life's going to keep moving, right? You're going to learn from it. If you don't learn from it, you'll learn from it, right?
Yeah. You might learn that you don't like coaching and you're going to move on from recruiting, but I just like the big accounts, like, I got this meeting with this huge account and it could make my career or make my year. And then you just started. And like, if your whole career is dependent on landing a one account, like you're not in the right career.
Right.
And I couldn't get that. I couldn't get that through. I put so much stock in the one big sale, this big client that I was pretty good at getting meetings, but the pressure I would put on myself made me ineffective. So,
you learn to hit base hits rather than trying to swing for home runs every time. You're gonna hit a lot more home runs that way because at some point you're gonna connect, and that took me a long time to learn too, or at least from a sales, recruiting, life perspective. Like
Adrian, I've seen you swing a baseball bat. How many home runs have you hit in life?
None. 0. Yeah. Oh, man.
But you are right. You hit home runs when you're not even.
It's an analogy. It's an analogy, Dean.
Good for you.
It's an analogy. Yeah. I don't think that I've seen you hit a baseball.
I'm pretty good.
I've seen you do overhead squats before, so I won't comment.
Oh, let's not go there. But that's
how that way.
I didn't want to be the best at exercising. I wanted to be the best at my sport. So I was not.
That's what CrossFit's about
for us. But yeah, hey, we should YouTube live a little home run derby, and we'll see.
I'm for it. All right, we'll set that up. We'll do it for a good cause or something like that. Cool.
Yeah.
Stinson, man, I appreciate you being on, sharing with us just your knowledge and your wisdom. Appreciate it, and we'll see if we can have you on again. Maybe sometime we'll do some fishing, and we'll have a good live stream there.
Yeah,
right?
we didn't even touch about that. When you come out, we'll just do an on-site here podcast on the river, and we'll make it happen. That's so exciting. But hey, thanks for having me on. I got to go in a little bit of a soapbox on labor and the labor market and what it takes to hire. I didn't warn you that was coming, but I appreciate you giving me a little platform. But yeah, the world has changed. So the labor market is different, and you got to approach it different. So
for sure. Well, thanks again, Stinson. We appreciate it.
Thanks. See ya.
Thanks for listening to the Recruiting Stories podcast. If you haven't yet, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Check us out on LinkedIn. Adrian Chapman and Cover 3 Consulting is our company page. Also check out our website, www.cov3consulting.com. Again, thanks for joining us, and we just simply want to remind you that you can change the world by putting people in a position where they can do the most good, and you do that by recruiting. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.